I'm Peter.
And I'm Paul.
Welcome to the Twin Perspective. Okay, it's great to be here again on another episode of the Twin Perspective. And today we have a special guest joining us. So again, not just a special guest. This is the first guest we're having ever on the Twin Perspective.
Right.
So she's the first guest. She's not only the first guest, she's also a mother of twins. So it's like having the Twin Perspective mom sitting in the middle. So it's great to have you here, Kathy. Thank you so much for joining us today. Kathy is a nurse, an educator, and division leader with over 30 years of experience in nursing and 20 years as a nurse educator. As Director of Innovation at College of Nursing, she advances creative teaching, trauma-informed pedagogy, and transformational belonging. She co-founded the Fifth Window Nurse Wellbeing Company and leads initiatives in simulation, innovation, and leadership development. She's passionate about reimagining nursing, education, and practice. She inspires others to find joy, resilience, and purpose to healthcare. So, if anyone listening, it would be nice to give Kathy a nice welcome to the Twin Perspectives. Thank you so much, Kathy.
I can do that. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you so much. I am extremely honored. I didn't realize that I was the first guest. I am extremely honored. First of all, I'm honored to be here with the two of you because I just stumbled on the two of you on LinkedIn and have loved following the both of you. I think when I first reached out to you all in a post, I think I said to you, I am the mom of twin boys. And so I think that's why you became so near and dear to my heart. Yeah. But thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
It's great to have you. Thanks for joining us. I'll just go through the backstory of how we met. And it's been great seeing your post on LinkedIn because what you always say resonates with me each time. And I remember seeing your post one day, and one of the posts was the one you did with your students where you told them about writing something down to their future self.
Yes.
Can you explain that, please?
Absolutely. So I teach. Not only am I the Director of Innovation, but I'm an associate professor in a College of Nursing here in the United States, at Philadelphia, at Thomas Jefferson University. And I teach a course called Professional Practice. And I really wanted to do something different this year with my students to really get them to start thinking about their professional identity, who they are, their values, and what they're going to take with them when they transition into practice from nursing school. So I did a little bit of, like everybody else, a little generative AI, prompt engineering, like what can I do that'll get the students who are second degree nursing students who come with some experience, and how do I connect? So we did a lot of out of the box type of assignments over this semester. And one thing that I got as a project idea was to have the students write a letter to their future self. And so I saved it for the last day of class. I created a very wonderful atmosphere. I put on some nice soothing music. We talked about what it was going to be like for them to move on to the next semester. And that I wanted them, and I gave them a few prompts. What do you want to remember about yourself as you're transitioning through nursing school, right? Who do you want to thank in the future that helped you along the way? And it could be, and I said, it could even be yourself, right? What values do you hold that you expect that you will take with you into your practice? I just had them write them, and I had them seal them up in their envelopes, and I had them give them to me, and I put them in a giant box, and I said, I will give them to you on the day you graduate from nursing school. So that's how I started that one out.
I love that. I wish I had that done to me too, because
that was my same comment.
Yeah, it's so fun because I'm thinking now to myself that I don't think what I wrote, because my expectations for my first semester was different when I graduated. I'm like, oh my God, like I didn't see the future,
And I think for some of the students, they have these ideals and think they don't expect to have any growth, but when they get to graduation, their growth is beyond. Right? It's not just like, I'm going to be an empathetic, compassionate nurse, but when they're ready to move into practice, they say, I take these leadership skills with me. I take these skills I've learned. I know how to navigate. I feel comfortable speaking up for myself. So that will be the interesting part when I see them again in May at graduation.
So it brings us to the first question of the day. And the question is, Kathy, we're going to throw this to you first. Of course, Peter is going to answer later, but from your perspective, because you're in the Twin Perspective, everyone has a perspective. From your perspective, what would you describe as an ideal nurse today?
That's a great question. So I think the ideal nurse to me today is someone who is really grounded in professionalism, yet they still have that humanistic approach to their work. I think it's someone who is creative, who thinks innovatively, is adaptable, right? No longer can they be structured or linear. They have to be able to be moving parts all around when they think about that. I think there's someone who has fierce advocacy, and I don't just mean for their patients, I mean for themselves and for our profession. I do think that there should be some sense of trauma-informed care or trauma-informed awareness, because we are all facing our own stories that we bring to everyone's table that I think that the ideal nurse has to be aware of.
I really resonate with all you said, and especially when you said being an advocate, not just for the patients, but for themselves. That really got me, because we're at that era right now. We're all pushed to be patient-centered, but no one's really looking back at, advocating for yourself. So we're just pouring out to patients. I really like that definition about that ideal nurse. Yes.
So, Peter, what's your ideal nurse?
Just what Kathy said. I'll say that my ideal nurse is someone who truly cares and empathizes. I feel like we've had so many nurses now in the right profession for the wrong reasons. I want that ideal nurse that came into the profession because they really love what they're doing. They love to empathize with patients. They love to care for themselves and also for the patients. I'm gonna steal Kathy's word. They advocate for themselves. I love that. I love that so much. They advocate for themselves and also for the patients. I feel like advocating for patients is really good. I've seen where providers are trying to do some other things for patients, but as nurses, we should be able to stand up and say, no, that's not gonna work. We could do better. I feel like an ideal nurse is a nurse that doesn't see nursing as a task, but sees it as a calling and a profession. Some just do nursing as a task. I'm gonna get these 5 patients done with, and that's it. It's beyond that for me. So I don't have all the words Caddy used, but I just can stick with mine a little bit. But yeah, I see as someone like that.
Awesome.
Okay. What about you?
I know, right? I was waiting for someone to ask me. Okay, so if I merge what Peter said and what you said, gives an ideal nurse. But for me, it's little addition to what you said is for an ideal nurse, how I see one is someone who actually understands the definition of nursing. What I mean by that is I've met lots of nurses and they really don't know what they're doing as a nurse. They don't know what the power of nursing is. So an ideal nurse should know what they have. They should be able to see the capabilities of what they can do as a nurse. And those are part of what you've listed, Kath. That would if I ask you, are you a nurse? You don't even need to tell me. Again, there are times you don't need to tell someone about your profession, but it just reflects with so many ways, and changing that stereotype of how nurses have been, and you show what that ideal nurse is. I think that change needs to come soon, and it's already here.
I think that is a really expansion of saying that nurses don't just work at the bedside, right? That our leadership or empathy or delegation, advocacy, adaptability, innovation, they're all kind of rolled into this one kind of the way you present or the way that you speak or the way that you engage in different settings, so that it's not just at the bedside, right? It's outside in the corporate world. It is out in the community. It is in a school. It is in a prison. It is just anywhere. It's all these encompassing attributes that you bring with you that just you can control the situation and you can be able to engage in anywhere that you are.
I remember a time I told someone that I'm a nurse, okay? And they're like, why are you not working in the hospital? And I'm like, what do you mean? And now this is this year. And because there was a photo I think we took with the scrubs, right? And automatically, the person was like, well, which hospital are you working in? And I'm like, listen, not all nurses work in the hospital. Our role is not caged or packaged to one set of skills, we can actually do different things as nurses. And that's why sometimes when people are being asked, what do? You don't want to put nursing as the first thing, because once you say nurse, they just see you as a bedside nurse.
Correct.
The second question is, what are the limiting barriers that keeps nurses stuck in that mindset, and how do we break them?
All right. I think the mindset is that do more mindset, right?
Yeah.
That we have this cultural mindset that in nursing historically that we've always been rewarded with self-sacrifice, right? That we are the systemic barriers, like we have short staffing, we have documentation overload, we have hierarchical structures that keep us contained. And then we also have these like personal barriers where we feel bad if we set boundaries. So if you put them all together, you are limited. Like you really are just putting a very small description around what a nurse does and what a nurse can do. And when a nurse starts to break out of that mold, right? Like you're only a nurse if you work at the bedside. I love every nurse and where they work and what they do. But in nurses who work at the bedside or in a hospital or an acute care area, they work in an environment where the patient gets all the meds that they need. The patient gets all of the diagnostic studies that they need. The patient gets the care that they need. And then the patient has to leave that facility and go somewhere else, right? And that could be anywhere. And those nurses who are not working with the access to all of those diagnostic studies and healthcare providers and meds to be given have to try to figure out, how do we continue this patient moving along on the care continuum, which, it creates this power struggle within our own profession. And I don't understand why it creates the power struggle. But I really do think that we've got to break the culture of the do more. Like, let's sacrifice. Like, it's an honor that I work 12 hours and I don't get to take a break. Like that, right? No, that's not humanistically possible.
I like that. I'm going to go back a little bit when we're younger. And, when you're doing like the alphabets and they say like A for apple, I remember like they usually tell us N for nurse, right? And the nurse that they draw to use to see is a lady with a hat on. And so that was the idea of what we saw as nursing. It was just a lady sitting down there with white scrubs, not even scrubs.
Was it like a dress or
white
gown?
dress with the little white cap.
On with the, So what's the definition of what the nursing looks like? However, we've evolved so much, but there's still that cultural stigma that's been in the past. And I feel like it's education and ignorance, though, because people are not yet understanding the fact that a nurse is not necessarily a lady. I have a provider, she's a doctor, and she said, I go into a patient's room with a big doctor badge right here, and I say, oh, I'm doctor this. And by the time I'm going back out, I hear the family saying, was that the nurse? Because she's a lady, but they don't see her. And I laugh. I said, I get where you're coming from, because the same way I walk into a patient's room, they think I'm the doctor. But I'm like, no, I'm your nurse. So to them, it's like gender-related professions. A doctor should be a male. A nurse should be a female. So it's we breaking that stereotypical chain and going beyond. And like you said, not just the hospital. Like, we're not bound to work at the hospitals. There's so much that nurses could do aside from bedside. So we have to understand that, but we have to start by educating people. And it doesn't just start from us. It starts from when they're back in school, like, in curriculum. I felt like my pathophysiology textbook one time, I was going through it, and I'm like, it's only females I'm seeing in here, like female body parts. You got to imbibe, like, stop putting like men, like different, like the picture should not just relate to a body part of a lady because it's nursing.
I just want to touch on that a little bit and follow up quickly. I teach also pre-nursing students an intro to nursing course. And one of the first things that I wanted to do in that class was I looked out and I saw such a diverse group of students sitting before me. And I was supposed to teach the history of nursing. And I made it a point that I was not going to talk about certain nurses, because when you say the nurse, like the first nurse or whoever invented nursing, there's one particular nurse everyone thinks of. And I always tell the students, there were nurses before her and there were nurses after her. So I've used a lot I wanted my students to see people that look like them who had already been in nursing to say, you know what, I belong here.
Right.
Like, I deserve this. I belong here. And I'm going to continue this legacy of whoever this nurse is that I do a lot of work with them. And there's a wonderful project that was started by one of the Johnson & Johnson Innovation Fellows. It's called Nurses You Should Know. And it's a website, and it has a lot of nurses of color, a lot of nurses from underserved populations or underrepresented populations that my students who sit in the class look up and they see what they've done in their lives, and what they advocated for and how they feel this sense of, I need to pick up the torch and I need to continue their work that they've done. So I try to do as much as I can with my students to break the mold, right? There are nurses with pink hair. There are nurses with tattoos. Those are my students who sit in my classroom, right? And there are neurodivergent nurses. There are able nurses. Like, they have to see people who look like them in nursing. And that's just something I didn't mean to get off subject of the question.
No, it's not off subject.
I really
it's
felt
not.
I really wanted to touch upon that because you're having that lens from when you went to school. I had that lens from when I went to school, and I want to change the lens for my students who go to school now.
It was more like they felt nurses were not supposed to be fashionable, to dress a certain way. You're supposed to act a certain way. You should not socialize. It's either you're in the library or you're this or you're that. So when you're out of that, they see you as doing something really different. And they're like, you're not a nurse. I'm like, no. How do you define a nurse?
And to that respect as well, Paul, I think, though, that we do a disservice for ourselves when we keep perpetuating on social media the memes of nurses be like, right? I think that we do a very, very bad, and then we get all up in arms when people only associate us with, doing like skills.
I agree with you. I want to piggyback on what you said, Kathy, about representation, right?
Yeah.
And I feel that's very important to me. You said something like you wanted your students to feel represented, like to see someone that they look like, and that's going to bring me to my question right now. I want to understand how it is. 'Cause so I went to nursing school, right? We were like probably 3 Black male nurses in there, and aside from 3 Black male nurses, I also felt like we were like very few Black people in my class, right?
Yeah.
So, and I remember telling that all our professors for clinicals, like, they were all ladies. Can I go talk to that really understands, or I want to have as a mentor to say, I totally understand where you're coming from as a man in nursing, as a Black man also, So that's my question to you. How would you say, so, because I feel like I advocate a lot for Black men in nursing. So what's your take with that gender discrimination sometimes in men in nursing?
So I always tell my students, because when I do my history of nursing and I do talk about men in nursing, I do talk about when men came in nursing, and I would say to them, 5,000 BC, men were nurses. It was actually, nursing was a men's profession. In monasteries, the religious orders, they provided the care to people. So before the modernization of nursing men took care of, and then it became and then when around the time when it became modernized and we needed some kind of formality to our education, it became domesticated work, right? And so who were those people who were going to do domesticated work? Women who never got married, right? So they became the domesticated servants, in essence, to be nurses. And then after, there's been a little trickle of men in nursing. And so I say to my male students, don't limit yourself to think that you only came into our profession in the You started our profession, and we do need to kind of embrace everyone who comes to our profession. And so for me personally, what I try to do with my students is I honestly, like, I can't advise or mentor my Black male students, right?
Right.
I can empathize, right? And I can try to use my trauma of informed awareness to,
Love that.
what it must be like for you to navigate sitting in the classroom. What is it like for you to navigate to be in clinical, right? So I try to, if I can, find people like you two who maybe would want to come talk to my students, right? And just tell them like what it's like to be a male in nursing, what it's like to be a Black male in nursing. So I try to do that as much as I can, but I also try to use as much inclusivity and belonging in general so that they don't feel like they are separated. So if I use the belonging language, if I create space where they feel comfortable, right? Maybe they'll feel like they belong, and then the conversation becomes, and they start to speak up, and they start to be engaged in my classroom, and they start to really maybe take initiative. Where before, maybe they just sat in the back of the room because they were afraid to say something because they didn't feel like they belonged.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, it's good we could talk about it because I know that people outside listening to us also feel like underrepresented, or they want to know like how to navigate this. So that's why I brought that topic up. And thank you so much. I recently, not the patient, the son said, "Can I get ladies to touch my mom?" And I'm like, okay, it's okay. We have to also accept, because sometimes it's not personal, it's not against me. I've got to accept that. They're not mad at me, or they're not like they don't like me because they don't know me. But we have to also accept preferences of individual preferences. It might be cultural. It might be just maybe they've been assaulted by a man before and you trigger something.
Right.
So you, two things I just want to follow up on with you.
Okay.
So in your response to what I was saying, you pretty much opened the door for me to talk about transformational belonging. And
Okay.
that has become like that's where I believe my passion is right now in nursing and nursing education, is to create environments where everyone feels like they belong. I don't need to single out different groups of students in my room if I give them opportunities to see people who look like them in nursing. And we talk about it in general in the whole class. Tell me something that you've learned about this nurse. What was the advocacy? What did they do? What did they start, right? We talk about it, and everybody gets enlightened by the particular nurse. But if I create environments where I am using belonging language, or I create spaces where I say to students, we're going to take the first minute or so in class and we're just going to do a soft landing. I know you're, stressed out about pathophysiology or this exam or that exam, but in this classroom, I want you to just relax because we're going to take some time for ourselves right now. And in addition to that, I think everyone should be trauma aware. You just said that right now. If someone doesn't want you to be their nurse, you may have re-traumatized somebody. It can be a trigger, but that doesn't mean you did it intentionally. Listen, you could not trigger out of 100 people, 99 people, and there may be that one person and you're doing everything right. But it's, you just have to know what you keep doing and being aware of some of the things that you might be doing, or even in the environment that you're in, that you might re-trigger somebody or re-traumatize them. But you're still with intention doing realizing that everybody has trauma. Everybody has trauma, right?
Right.
And it's not big or little. It's my trauma is my trauma. Your trauma is your trauma, right? It's how it is. And to recognize that. And then you sometimes can recognize symptoms in people. Some people are hyperactive, some people are hypoactive, right? So what might that look like in people? For me, it's what does it look like in my student? Hyperactive might be the student who's always raising their hand, asking question after question after question, right? But hypoactive might be the student who's just scrolling on their phone all day long because that's how they shut down, right? And then being able to say, well, what can I do to engage people? How do I, figure this out? And then the last thing is not to re-traumatize someone. And you just intentionally try not to do that. I'm also the mom of 2 boys, right? I've been traumatized myself by them. But, I also think I have made a great connection over time. And I actually wrote a LinkedIn post about how I have changed the way I teach. When I first started out in nursing, My kids were young. They were very young. So I had that very like mama bear protective like feeling. Like I was going to make sure that they were okay. I was going to get them from point A to point B. I was going to make sure they get to clinical. I was going to make sure they get to the next class. You know, I was super sometimes people would talk about the students and I would get super defensive. I'm like, these are my students, you know, like, and then as I started to become more comfortable in my own pedagogy and in what I wanted to do with my students and where I really found myself in the world. You know, my kids were growing up, so I felt like I was more of like, you know, a guide. You have to make some mistakes now. I'm going to be there if you make the mistake and kind of help you as you go along the way, but you know, you have to try some of this on your own. And I always just tell my kids since they were little, you know, every action has a consequence, right? Let's figure this out. You know, you don't do well on an exam. Is it because you didn't study? Right. Or maybe you did study, but maybe you're not studying the right way that makes you effective now to be successful in nursing school. And as I have evolved and my boys are 21, so they're older, I feel like I'm more like a mentor, right? And that's how I am with my students. I feel like I'm still fiercely a mama bear. I'll protect my students to the day I die, just like my kids. But I feel like I'm more of a mentor now for them. And it has certainly evolved over time with them.
Love that. That would bring me to the question I was going to ask you. What has made you, you know, change the way you lead or practice? What was that motivation for you?
Yeah. So I think what really changed me was the pandemic. And I remember, wow, I still get like really kind of worked up about it. You know, it was like March when we shut down in the United States. And I had students who were going to graduate in 2 months and enter the workforce. And so we were online trying to teach them. We were trying to figure out how we were going to get them into clinical. We were navigating the world just like everybody else. You know, every time the CDC came out with a new guideline, we were changing it. And I just kept thinking to myself, what am I sending these students out to? I did not prepare them for this. I remember like spending like nights thinking, how do I prepare them? Like, I don't know what to do. And I just remember helping the nurses. I became part of a peer-to-peer support group. And I would offer, you know, to meet with nurses and just kind of talk with how their shift was, what they're feeling during this. And it was around June when I would get calls from the new to practice nurses. So it was the students who just graduated. I would do peer-to-peer sessions with them and they were just traumatized and terrified. Yeah. And I thought, like, I need to do something. I need to figure this out. After we kind of started to emerge a little bit and the guidelines kind of got a little bit more stabilized and we knew what we were doing and how to protect ourselves and the vaccine came out and we felt like we could enter the world a little bit more, I saw that my students who were coming back to me in the classroom looked just like the nurses I was talking to in the hospital. They had been traumatized, but a whole different way. And I kind of made it my, you know, that became the spark. And I said, you know what? I need to help people find joy again. People have to connect with joy. I didn't want them I didn't want to just to survive this work that we were doing called nursing. It was really about creating some way for them to find joy and see joy again in their lives. And that's kind of how and it evolved more and more over time, but that's really kind of what I was really looking at when I was thinking about how have I changed over time.
Beautiful. It's beautiful to know that we have people like Kathy, like still here supporting nurses. As you know, I'm an advocate for all that. Like I feel like we should stand for each other. We should help each other grow. We should go against the myth that says nurses eat their young and realize that nurses could be actually mentors and mothers to other people to like, build them, not eating them up, So hearing you say that just gives me joy. You know, I really hope and wish that we have more people like you because, like you said, we all have our traumas, we all have things we're dealing with. But when you put in conscious effort to make someone's day better or someone's life or career better, because you know that they might be going through this, and in all that you said, you preparing them for the unknown, like no one knows. That goes a long way. And one of the foundation for me for the twin perspective is to also reach young nurses, people that are also coming up to know that, there's so much we can get from each other. So we're trying to encourage them also, the people coming ahead, people in the field right now to have that support system. We got to stand strong together in this journey.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Train of thought here. I entered the Johnson & Johnson Hack for Health virtual hackathon in May of 2020. I had nothing to do. Nobody had anything to do. So over the weekend, I joined this and I got part of a group that was working on how do we support our clinical nurses during the pandemic. And out of it came, we won my track. We won. We created an app. It was called Fifth Window. And the app at the time was good. It was free resources where nurses could do small, like curated guided imagery or meditation, something that could ground them, right? Something that could give them instant access to move out of this like anxiety space and come back into the parasympathetic nervous system. And like I said, over time, we saw that when we came together as a collective in any space as nurses, we were really starting to thrive. So we, about 2 years ago, totally redid and reorganized and reimagined what Fifth Window was. And now we say Nurse Your Joy, where our purpose is to help nurses understand how do they find joy again in their life while they're still focusing on all the self-care of personal and physical and emotional and professional, right? And spiritual, but in a form of understanding that joy is something you have to cultivate. Happiness is fleeting, right? I'm happy when I have soft serve ice cream with sprinkles, vanilla, right? Like that makes me happy. But I think when I have my ice cream, I actually take the time to, who am I with? My mom loved ice cream. She loves soft serve ice cream. So every time I have soft serve ice cream, I think of my mom. Like that's what brings me joy. It's connecting to those moments where you really have to cultivate joy. And so I really do like the fact that you want young nurses or nurses entering the profession, no matter how, or even people who've been here for a long time to really why did you go into nursing? There was something that brought you joy when you first went into nursing. Let's see if we can find that again, right? And hopefully then they don't leave our profession. They want to stay in our profession.
I love that.
I practiced for a while. I was done. I wanted to do other things. And I had to find joy in other things I wanted to do. But one thing I said I was going to do was not leave the profession entirely, just change the vertical I was moving in, but I was still within the profession.
I also want to say something about what Kathy said she said, when the nurses, she realized that when they came together, it was a power force. It was just they could do more together. And that reminds me, when we're younger, we're Nigerians, right? So there was this thing they taught us in school, right? They take I don't know if they do it in America though. They take a broom, right? They give you one broom and they say just break it. Then you break the broom, right? Easily. Then they give you the old a packed broom like together, and they say try to break that. And it's so hard to break because there's a lot of brooms, right? So they made us realize by yourself, just that strand, you're easy to break. But when you come collectively, you're unbreakable.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned that, that's what my mind just went to straight. Like together, we could do a lot, So it's that collective power,
Absolutely. And one of the things that we stress at Fifth Window is that you can fill we call it joy jars outside of nursing, right? So that you can go to work and you might be depleted because let's face it, the caring profession is hard on us, right?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Very hard, right? But there's something outside of that brings you joy. So maybe you love to garden. Maybe you love to read a book. Maybe you like to spend time with, and we use all these we use our senses. Like I talk about having a mindful cup of coffee, right? I love coffee and I have a mindful cup of coffee, but then that fills my joy cup up so that when I do go back to working with someone, right? If I'm going back to work, I'm doing a shift. If I'm, working with colleagues, going back to teaching, I'm coming back with this joyful mindset. I haven't been depleted and then go home and stay depleted. I take care of myself outside. and then I come back. And so then I can engage again with why I was here.
I just give tips for, people in the profession, like nurses up here, and let me use this word that you're using. How can we still keep our joy, despite everything going on around us?
So I think first and foremost is shift the mindset from do more to do what matters, right? I think that if we really focus on that, doing what matters, and I think that it counts for everything, not only in nursing, but for taking time for ourselves. So that creates boundaries, right? Like, don't keep saying yes. I tell my students, no is a sentence with a period at the end. And if you want to make it
Say that
exciting,
again,
put an
Patty. Say that
exclamation
again.
point. No is a full sentence.
Right.
I tell my students, always stay curious. Be asking those questions, right? Why? Why we do it like this? Why can't we try this? What if we did this instead? So always staying curious is extremely important to me to tell my students. I think my other tip is to feel like you belong. And if you don't belong, then that's not the place for you. And if you're the one that's creating spaces, make sure you create the spaces that people feel like they belong.
That was powerful. I love those tips. We're gonna make sure those tips are posted.
Okay.
That is
Okay.
beautiful. Kathy, I'll say that it's been really, really amazing, you joining us here today.
Very kind of you to say.
Thank you so much. I'm also going to say thank you because I do appreciate you coming. That's great. So I'm going to conclude this podcast. And the way I'm going to conclude this is, so Kathy has given a tip. I'm going to ask Peter if he can give one tip. What tip would you give to nurses, both new and, incoming nurses and people in the profession? What would you want to say, to them?
Well, if there was just one thing I would say is whatever they do, let them find joy and happiness in it. I feel like our mental health is very important. I feel like you cannot pour from an empty cup. So fill yourself up first and to pour into others.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the time. We really
Thank you for
appreciate
having
you.
me.
Thank
I feel
you.
so honored and
Thank
I feel
you,
so
thank
We
you.
feel honored
special.
to.
No, I'm the one that's honored and I feel special and I feel like I am the mother of the twin perspective.
You really are. You really are. You really, really are.
So,
Thank you again.